Selling Pokemon cards is a legitimate craft. No, I'm not referring to the people in the videos stepping over each other, knocking TVs over, and elbowing people trying to buy boxes to resell. What I'm referring to is the knowledge, discovery, curiosity, and curation that is rooted in collecting to then offer to the collector through my store. That's what it means to me, at least. Part-time seller or full-time seller, I wonder if other sellers think similarly with regards to selling as a craft being continuously owned, even if the definition is different. Perhaps to another seller, their craft could be based on negotiation, trading, entertaining, or pure math. I wonder how many sellers think about this. Does it even matter? We're in a boom period anyway. Most people are reaping the benefits, whether their existing inventory is rising in price or the boxes that someone pushed a kid out of the way for made them $50 via Facebook Marketplace. As long as the money is coming in and secondary market prices continue to move up and to the right, everything should be okay, correct? Questions stop being asked, and suddenly, everyone has all the answers. For me, there isn't a day that goes by where I'm not asking myself what I'm not doing enough of, where I can be better, or how to improve my inventory selection for the collector. I'm entering my 5th year as a Pokemon card seller and entering my 3rd year of selling as a full-time commitment. When I left my corporate job, I was making a 6-figure salary with benefits in a top high cost of living city. Upon leaving, I knew that I needed to sustain a monthly sales stream to not only continue to operate my business, but to also pay my bills. For me, difficulty as a full-time seller doesn't come in the form of effort. It's my job that I happen to love doing. It does not feel like a job. The difficulty comes in the form of it being my main sources of income when thinking about how the business will be in the long term. Long term meaning a year to 2, 2, 3 on the high end. One thing I always caution my peers in the space is that anyone can have an amazing show selling or an amazing stretch of sales, whatever that number is. However, can you do that again? Can you do that throughout the year? Because once something is sold, it is gone. It either needs to be replaced or the revenue needs to come from somewhere else. I can't stress these questions enough because I have lived it myself. In 2023, my gross revenue from my Pokemon card selling was about $500,000, primarily through eBay. My first card show was at the end of 2023. At the time, I knew that simply matching this number would be a challenge because 25% of that gross revenue figure came from 2 cards sold in a deal. The net margin on these 2 cards was too significant to not sell them. It felt like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity by my standards. Replicating something like that would have been an unreasonable expectation to set and not the way to operate my business long term. In 2024, my gross revenue was about $600,000 across 2 primary selling channels, eBay and in-person shows. I will never move into selling via online streaming and would rather go out of business. There were no massive home run sales. My 2024 sales were driven by cards that were lower priced, higher volume in sales, yet still margin heavy items. In the article, the pictures were there. Maybe I'll just show my phone. Those cards. For the record, my net income and hours worked per week are both net negative, meaning I worked more and made less money versus what I would have made if I stayed at a corporate job. I still wouldn't trade this phase, an opportunity of my life, to return to that. I'm way happier doing this. I will not go back to that for now. However, that's the trade-off. You want to sell Pokemon cards full-time for 3 years? Best to figure out how to replace as much as your previous income as possible, but if you make more than your full-time job, that's amazing work. I believe that the long-term sustainability of this type of business is the brutal reality that full-time sellers need to realize, especially as competition in our space increases. A question that every seller should revisit regularly is, in our space where inventory is sourced on the secondhand market and sourceable inventory is finite, where are the sales going to come from? I believe that a portion of a seller's inventory should be comprised of their best sellers, items that you're selling in high quantity relative to cumulative inventory, thus generating reliable net positive cash flow for your store and the ability to reacquire at the lowest price possible. I mentioned discovery, curiosity, knowledge, and curation at the start of this post. For me, those aspects are present in the experimentation loop of determining what best sellers are to me over the past 2 years. Best sellers are the items you feel like you have trouble keeping in stock, which is a good problem to have. The ones that right after making a quantity available, you feel like you need more. Reaching this balance of understanding your data and training your sourcing instincts will enable you to act proactively on building a sustainable inventory rather than building a reactive inventory, which to me is based on copying and letting market comps tell you what to buy. Also, I don't believe it is as simple as buy X number of copies of this card and print money. Applying that across the board would be disastrous. It's more nuanced than that. Note here is that the remaining sections are written from my experience and point of view. It is important to note that 99% of my store's inventory are Japanese cards across all eras. In my opinion, best sellers carry these characteristics. First would be universal appeal. This should not be conflated with popularity. Popularity exists within a period. It wears off. I define cards with universal appeal as those that make people go, "That's a good card." It's a type of card that is instantly recognizable in some way, whether it be the character, artwork, variant, release, or some combination of these. They're cards that every type of buyer wouldn't mind having in their collection. When approaching these cards from a collectability perspective, they're established. Second is recognizable and easy to process. I believe this is straightforward. If a card has most casual buyers going, "What is this?" or generally have more questions than comments, you may be dealing with something more on the niche side. It's not a bad thing. Just don't expect to sell through your entire stock in a week. Next, established pricing. At every price level, best sellers should be priced to where everyone says, "That makes sense." It's part of why cards with universal appeal are established. They're recognizable to the point where most buyers will go, "That price makes sense." Nowadays, we don't ask questions as to why ponchos are thousands of dollars, despite not being rare cards, why Scream cards are priced at the tiers that they are, or why well-executed Japanese full art cards in PSA 10 are about $40 to $75. They're where they should be in terms of price, whereas popular cards have many people wondering why they're priced the way they are, and when prices drop, no one is surprised. Fourth is accessibility. On the surface, this is self-explanatory. You need to be able to acquire and then reacquire items in large quantities. This definition will vary based on the seller, on what large is. On the sourcing side, this is obvious. For the buyer, a combination of the three aforementioned characteristics will increase the likelihood that your items will resonate with buyers. My recommendation is to take the notes above and integrate them into the basic functions that you are already doing to operate your store's inventory. For myself, repeating these functions over the years led me to owning my craft as a seller, and I'll continue to do so until I quit or die, whichever comes first. Skin in the game. Knowledge. You learn by doing. Your sales data speaks for itself. It's tangible data, assuming you are recording your sales if you're selling in person. Luckily, passive selling platforms do this for you. eBay's Performance Hub does a great job of giving you a live look at your sales data at various levels. When something is selling fast, it could be a sign to buy more. There are many insights to draw from this event. Evaluate why your stock is out of stock. What about the card attracts buyers? And what characteristics about the card are shared across others? Perhaps more importantly, selling large quantities of a specific item will tell you which new releases could have cards that share similarities to your best sellers and potentially become solid additions to your inventory. The knowledge you gain from selling over time needs to be applied to manage your risk. It shouldn't be said, but if it was already obvious, if it wasn't obvious already, the space we operate in was capital intensive, and that's before any grading costs are factored in, and shipping, and supplies, and gas, and table fees. Anyway, sourcing sense, discovery, and curiosity. In today's landscape, new releases have more hype than other. Be careful not to conflate popularity with what you perceive to be universal appeal. Singles prices tend to start high at release and then fall once the set has been out for some time. The general public moves on to the new thing quickly with a short memory and attachment to what was previously the hot new thing. In my opinion, this is one of the better times to source a potential bestseller. However, there are always exceptions. For example, I recently bought 2 cards from the most recent Battle Partners release in fairly large quantities. This goes against what I just mentioned about new releases, but again, exception, not the rule. I bought these cards because despite being a fresh new release, the price felt right for me based on similar cards and releases. Now, having a sense for sourcing is hypercritical to establishing bestsellers and for me, improving my craft as a seller. As mentioned above, the space we operate in is in the secondhand market. We are competing amongst ourselves over a finite amount of specific cards. Improving your sensing sources will allow you to move quicker because you're not the only one thinking of the same thing when it comes to buying cards, especially in today's landscape. Not only do you need to be plugged in, but you must be ready to buy now. There are numerous times when I would have a page open with cards that I'm planning to or considering purchasing, only to come back later and see that they're now sold out. The same thing applies if you're sourcing at a show, for example. You see a bunch of copies in a case, you feel like it's the right move, you come back later, it's gone. It's normal. It happens and that's okay. It's not the end of the world. You'll live. You'll just have to figure out where else to find cards in the quantity you're looking for at your target price. That's where knowledge and conviction comes into play. Increase your knowledge and shorten your decision to purchase, and snap buyers will come much easier. Cards to collecting mindset, curation. I believe bestsellers should not be bound to graded items, meaning you don't have to sell only PSA 10s or think that your sourcing is limited to PSA 10 or bust. Throughout 2024, I'd become enamored with the idea of making inaccessible cards accessible. There's so many objectively good cards in our space that carry premiums based on their condition. Not everyone can or wants to spend a premium on a PSA 10 version or even on a 9. However, an ungraded, near mint, on a PSA 7 scale or worse, card with great eye appeal and at a softer price point is a much easier It is much easier for many buyers to fit into their budget. At the end of the day, they spend way less to get the same card. That's a win for the buyer every time. Same ideas on bestseller characteristics apply as well. These cards have recognizable characters, universal appeal, competitive pricing, and are highly available. Here's an example of a few cards that fit this type of mold. I think I showed the Mew twice. Two different Mews. Final thoughts. Again, cards are finite. A specific card will get more difficult to source as time goes on, although it may not be immediately felt. It may take years for this to occur, but even the highest printed main sets stop being printed at some point. There's an end life for these in your store, and that is a personal evaluation that you need to make on when to move on. It's when you deem them too costly or too unavailable to source. Probably both. However, bestsellers help you scale and can help you de-risk the volatility in monthly sales for your business. They're the singles and doubles that you know your margin on while you work on hitting the home run, if that's even necessary. You can build a solid business on just lower end, high volume, solid margin inventory. This type of inventory could even see the benefits of a major market shift during a boom, which is why time in the market is critical. And with time in the market, your craft as a seller should significantly improve by participating in every step of the buying and selling journey.